This happened years ago, back when I was just 19 years old. I am now in my mid-20s, but the memory is etched into my brain with the precision of a scar. You know how some memories fade? This one doesn't. It stays sharp because of how deeply, viscerally creeped out I was. Back then, I was living over 600 miles away from my parents in a completely different state. I was trying to be independent, trying to start my own life, but the tether to home was still strong. Even though there was a massive distance between us, my mom and I were inseparable over the phone lines. We talked at least twice a week, sharing everything. So, when the news dropped, when we found out her cancer was back, the world stopped. I didn't think twice. I didn't calculate costs or risks. I just knew I had to drop everything and drive down to see her immediately. A plane ticket would have been way too expensive for a 19-year-old student, and I had my trusty steed, a 10-year-old Toyota. It was a bit beat up, the paint was fading, and it had its quirks, but it got me from point A to point B cheaply and quietly. It was my safety bubble. My parents, being parents, weren't thrilled at the idea of me driving 11 hours all by myself through the night. They worried about fatigue, about the car breaking down, about the dangers of the highway. But my mind was made up. I was coming home. So they offered me a deal to ease their anxiety. I would have to stop at a rest stop every 2 to 3 hours to stretch my legs and, most importantly, call them. In exchange for this courtesy, they would pay for my gas. It seemed fair. There was a catch, though. If I didn't call within that 3-hour window, they would assume the worst, that I'd been in a terrible accident, and they would call me repeatedly, interrupting the audiobook or podcast they knew I would be binging. I accepted the deal without hesitation. That is exactly why I found myself at this particular rest stop at 2:45 a.m. The world is a different place at 2:45 a.m. It feels emptier, quieter, and somehow heavier. This was actually one of the nicer stops along the interstate. It was surprisingly well lit, bathing the concrete in a sterile, yellow humming glow. There were multiple vending machines that didn't have those huge, depressing metal cages around them, which is usually a good sign. The payphone wasn't broken, and the whole area looked clean. There were a couple of other cars scattered around the lot, dark shapes with people sleeping inside them, safe in their metal shells. I checked my watch. I still had 15 minutes before I absolutely had to check in with my parents. I decided to use the time to wake up my body. I got out of my car, the cool night air hitting my face, and stretched my arms up high. Then I almost jumped out of my skin. "Miss, can I ask you for a favor?" The voice was right behind me. A man's voice. Low, gravelly, and far too close. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was leaning against my car. I have absolutely no idea how he got there so fast. I had checked my mirrors. I had looked around when I parked. I didn't see him anywhere near me. But suddenly, there he was, uncomfortably close, invading my personal space in the vast emptiness of the parking lot. He looked like he was in his 40s. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't look dirty or twitchy like the drug addicts you're warned about. He was dressed normally, but he was too close. His body language didn't scream threat immediately, but my instincts were already buzzing. Even though I was only 19 years old, barely over 5 feet tall, and at that point in my life, maybe 110 pounds soaking wet at best, I tried to be polite. Even though I had already binged a lot of true crime media and knew exactly the dangers of a girl my age alone at night, with an out-of-state license plate, my dumbass asked what he needed. He smiled, a tight expression that didn't reach the rest of his face. He told me that he had accidentally locked his keys and his phone in his truck. He pointed vaguely toward the darker side of the lot. He asked if he could just borrow my phone real quick to call his friend. He promised it would only take a second, and it would really help him out. I almost handed him my phone. It was instinct. Someone needs help, you help them. I was reaching into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold glass of the screen, ready to hand it over with a no problem. And then I actually looked at his face. Like I said, this rest stop was surprisingly well lit. The sodium lights cast everything in high contrast. And this guy looked really normal, except for his eyes. He had dead shark eyes. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the Ted Bundy look. The mouth is smiling, the cheeks are lifted, but the eyes are vacant. They're empty black holes staring way too hard, seeing nothing and everything at the same time. There was no soul behind them, just a predator assessing prey. I got that feeling, that primal, runaway feeling that starts in your gut and floods your veins with ice water. I knew immediately, with absolute certainty, do not hand this guy your only way to call for help. So, I put on my best customer service smile, the one I used to use when a customer was screaming at me over an expired coupon. I told him, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but I don't have a charger, and I really need to save all my battery for the tracking app my parents have on my phone. I actually need the juice to call my parents right now, like this second. But good luck." I turned around abruptly and walked about 20 feet away, trying to put distance between us without breaking into a run. He didn't leave. I glanced back. He was still just standing there, leaning casually against my car, watching me. He hadn't moved an inch, and now I didn't know what to do. I was trapped outside. I didn't want to leave him alone with my car, because he creeped me out so badly. But he had a serial killer face. Going to the bathroom was out of the question. I didn't want to be cornered in a small room, but I also wanted to get away from him. I wanted to prove I wasn't going to help, so maybe he would just leave. I could technically get back into the car, but to do that, I would have to get really close to him. I'd have to squeeze past him to get to the driver's side, or crawl over my passenger seat while he was right there. And he wasn't moving. So, I did the first thing that popped into my terrified mind. I called my dad. And of course, for the first time that entire night, my dad didn't pick up the phone. When I heard his voicemail greeting, my stomach dropped. I glanced back at the car. The guy still hadn't moved. He was still just staring at me, unblinking. So, I faked a phone conversation. I held the phone to my ear and angled my body so that the guy couldn't see the screen was black. I loudly said, "Hey Dad, yeah, I'm doing great. I should be home in about 30 minutes. In reality, I was still at least 4 hours away. I mentioned exactly where I was, loudly naming the rest stop. I reassured the fake caller that this was a great stop with plenty of lighting and a couple of visible security cameras that I pointedly looked up at. The guy still hadn't moved. He was a statue. I was running out of steam on this fake conversation. In the years since, I've thought of a million clever things I could have said, threats I could have made, police I could have pretended to call. But in that moment, at 2:50 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, I was beginning to seriously freak out, and my mind went blank. So I hung up. I didn't know what else to do. I had hoped the fake phone call would scare him off, prove that people knew where I was. But he was still leaning against my car, owning it. I stalled for another couple of minutes. I walked over to the vending machines and bought some stale cookies I didn't want. I walked around in a small circle. At this point, he had been leaning against my car, staring at me, for at least 10 minutes. I honestly debated waking up one of the men sleeping in their parked cars nearby and asking for help. But the social anxiety of waking a stranger up to help me get into my own car annoyed me enough that I stopped stalling. I decided that unless he physically touched me, I was just going to pretend he wasn't there. I was going to be bold. I headed back to my car, clutching my keys like a weapon. He waited until I was unlocking my car door before he started talking to me again. "I really need to use your phone," he said again. His voice had changed slightly. "I'm stranded here unless I can call my friend to bring the spare keys." He wasn't angry. He wasn't begging. His voice sounded weirdly friendly, almost calm. But he had been creepily watching me for way too long while physically blocking my exit. I wasn't falling for it. I almost pointed out the working payphone that was literally 20 feet away. I almost argued. Part of me felt guilty. What if I was just being a bitch to a guy who genuinely needed help? But then, as I was opening the door, he leaned forward. He invaded the space between the door and the car frame. I lost all my nerve. I practically dove into the driver's seat. I slammed the door and locked it as fast as my fingers could move. My heart was thundering in my ears. He didn't move. He stood right next to the glass. He didn't move until I started the car and threw it into reverse. And then, finally, he stepped back just enough to let me pull out. I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I was so focused on getting away from him. I just needed distance. Then, halfway out of the rest stop exit, my phone rang. It was my mom. My mom, who would freak out if I didn't pick up right away. My mom, who was already sick with cancer. I realized I needed to put on my seatbelt, and I couldn't drive and talk safely in this state. I looked in my rearview mirror. I could still see him. He was standing right next to where I had been parked, but his back was to me now. He was far enough away that I felt okay parking again just for a second to answer the phone. But I kept my engine running. My foot hovered over the gas. I kept watching him in the mirror like a hawk. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't want her to worry. "Everything is fine. I'm just leaving the rest stop now. My ETA is the same." Now that I was in my locked car, moving away from him, I was beginning to feel foolish. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he was just a stranded guy. She started scolding me about speeding, her motherly instincts kicking in. I tuned her out because I saw movement in the mirror. The guy was moving now. As my mom lectured me about road safety, I watched the guy walk with purpose. He crossed the lot to a dark truck. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, unlocked the door, and got in. The keys being locked in the truck. It was a lie. It was all a lie. I watched the truck headlights flare to life. I watched it head back out to the freeway and drive out of sight into the darkness. I sat there, frozen, listening to my mom's voice, realizing how close I had come to something. I had to pretend to be fine to not upset her. I didn't get back onto the road for another 20 minutes. I sat there shaking, and when I finally did get back on the highway, I didn't speed. I drove exactly the speed limit. I didn't want to catch up to that truck. I didn't want to see those shark eyes ever again. I found out years later that the closest city to that rest stop has a major problem with sex trafficking. They say that girls who look like they don't live nearby, or girls who look like they might be living out of their cars, tend to be the primary targets. I don't know if that was what was happening. I don't know if he was a trafficker, or a killer, or just a creep trying to steal a phone. But I know what I saw in his eyes, and I know he had his keys the whole time. This happened when I was much younger, maybe 9 or 10 years old. My mother had finally mustered the courage to break up with her wealthy, yet abusive boyfriend. It was a turbulent time. We had recently moved back to my hometown of Sacramento from Kingman, Arizona, and I was having trouble adjusting to our new life. Before, we had lived in a big, nice house in a beautiful community with manicured lawns and very little crime. Now, my mom was a single mother of 2, struggling to make ends meet. She moved us into a small townhouse community in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly the safest. Luckily, amidst the chaos, I found an anchor. I met a girl at school I really connected with. By pure chance, she happened to live in a 4-plex complex right across the street from us. We quickly became inseparable, attached at the hip, and so did our moms. Her mom was a lesbian, and her girlfriend was also a good friend of my mom. It became our new normal. It was not unusual for them to be at our house late into the night, the adults staying up drinking and laughing in the living room, while we were upstairs in my room, giggling and gossiping about the boys at our school. Well, this particular night started no differently. It was pretty late, so we decided to just have a sleepover. My best friend and I ran across the street to her empty house to grab her favorite blanket and her sleepover bag. The street lights hummed above us as we crossed the asphalt. We were laughing as we walked up her driveway, lost in our own world. But she stopped suddenly. I looked at her, and all the color had drained from her face. She was staring at her front door. Nobody was home. Her mom and the girlfriend were at my house. But all the lights were on in her house. Every single one. And the front door was standing wide open. While we stood there, frozen, a shadow danced on the wall inside the entryway. Someone was in there. Terrified, we spun around and ran back to my house, our feet slapping hard against the pavement. We burst through my front door, both of us crying and babbling hysterically about a man being in the house. My uncle, who happened to be staying with us for a short while, jumped up. He ran over to investigate immediately. But when he got there, the door was shut and locked. The house was completely dark. No lights, no shadows. The adults laughed. They told us we were imagining things. They said we watched too many scary movies, that it was late, and we were just tired kids spooking ourselves. But we both knew what we saw. That image of the open door and the dancing shadow never really left our minds. Weeks went by. Strange things started happening in our house. Doors that they distinctly remembered closing would be open when they came back. Items in their rooms would be rearranged, subtly but noticeably. Clothes and underwear started going missing for drawers. Her mom's and her girlfriend's sex toys started vanishing. Obviously, this part was left untold to us kids at the time, but the adults were confused. Still, they convinced themselves that nothing weird was going on. Maybe they misplaced things. Maybe they were forgetful. Until one night. It was late, and I was spending the night at her place this time. My older sister was babysitting us, and we were playing Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo. After a while, we got bored with the jungle levels. My best friend mentioned she had Mario Kart in a box stored out in their garage. We wanted a race. The light in the garage was broken, and their landlord was more of a slumlord who never fixed anything. So, we grabbed a couple of flashlights and went to search for the game. The garage was cluttered, filled with boxes and old furniture. We made our way toward the back, beams of light cutting through the dusty darkness. She knew the box was in the far back corner. We navigated around piles of junk. Suddenly, she tripped and fell hard. She stood up, brushing off her knees, and we both pointed our flashlights at where she had fallen over. It wasn't a box. It was a pile of blankets. Blankets that weren't hers. Blankets that looked dirty. We moved our lights around. We realized that somebody had made a little cubby, a hidden living space, tucked away in the corner of their barely ever used garage. There were food wrappers, empty bottles. And then the beam of my flashlight hit the wall. We found a hole. A jagged, rough hole that someone had manually sawed out of the drywall. It led directly outside to the back of the building. Needless to say, we screamed. We dropped everything and ran inside, slamming the door behind us. My sister called 911 immediately, and then called our mom, who ran over to sit with us while we shook. It turns out somebody had been living in their garage for weeks, if not months. Since they didn't have a washer or dryer in there, they rarely, if ever, ventured into the garage, so no one ever noticed a guest. The hole the person sawed in the wall faced the back of the building, a neglected alleyway where no one ever went, so it wasn't visible from the street or driveway. Worst of all, when the police searched the little cubby, they found a ton of stolen items. The dirty underwear, the missing sex toys, stolen food, family pictures they had taken from frames inside the house. When he heard them leave and knew the house was empty, he would just come inside through the connecting door. He would go through their things, eat their food, use their bathroom, and touch their lives. He was living with them, a ghost in the walls. The guy never came back after we found his nest. They never caught him. The scariest part to me is that I spent the night there so often. Who knows what could have happened had he been violent? Or maybe he was violent, and he was just waiting for the right time to strike. Luckily for us, we'll never have to know. I'll try to keep the backstory as short as possible to get to the nightmare. A couple of years ago, my living situation evaporated faster than I had expected it to. I found myself in a desperate spot. I had to pack all my possessions into my car and leave where I was living immediately. There was going to be a short stretch of time where I had next to no money. Certainly not enough for a week or two of $80 a night motel fees. I had a little over $100 to my name, all in. So I improvised. I bought a cheap tent and some other similarly crappy camping equipment from a discount store. I bought some ramen noodles. I decided I would crash in the woods. That way, I could leave my car full of my stuff parked somewhere and still have a place to sleep without burning cash. I lived in a fairly forested area at the time, and since I grew up in the area and partied out in the woods a lot in high school, I knew a decent amount of trails and discreet hiding places not far from civilization. I brought my gear out to a very small mountain nearby. Since the forecast said it was going to rain that night, I hunted around for a nice place to set up. Being on a mountain, I couldn't just find high ground easily. But I did find this nice little plateau that projected a few hundred feet from a nearest slope before falling off. By my best judgment, it seemed as safe a place as any. Secluded, flat, hidden. Well, it turns out my judgment sucks. Not only was the place right in the path of the rain, but all of the water from the slope above had funneled down. It turned into an impromptu stream whose force ran right through my tent. I woke up at maybe 2 a.m. to the sound of rushing water. I was freezing. I found my sleeping bag half immersed in icy mud water. All my possessions inside the tent were soaked through. Both my phone and my flashlight were ruined by the water, so I had absolutely no source of light. It was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels thick. Despite the lack of illumination, I knew I had to get back to my car because I was freezing cold and risking hypothermia. Since my clothes were literally soaked through and heavy with water, I decided to leave them. I embarked into the storm wearing nothing but my boxers. My wallet was ruined too, so I didn't bring it. I quickly realized that I was not going to be able to find the trail in the dark. The woods had transformed into a confusing labyrinth of wet branches and shadows. So, I went back to the tent and grabbed my machete. That way, I could hack through the brush if I needed to. Now, most of you can probably see where things are going, but I would remind you that you're sitting someplace warm and reasonably safe reading this. If you want to put yourself in my frame of mind, think of those cold winter days when you step outside and the shock hits you. Now imagine that, but wet, half-naked, and broke. Your stream of consciousness transforms from normal thoughts into an endless scream of "screw this." Add a bunch of your worldly possessions being ruined into the mix. So, I faced the general direction of my car and just started walking. I was angry. I was chopping at anything that happened to block my path with a machete. Eventually, after much effort and shivering, I saw an end to the tree line ahead of me. I walked out, relieved, but then I realized I wasn't at the road. I was in somebody's backyard. Worse, however, is the fact that said backyard had a screened-in porch. And inside that porch, illuminated by the soft, warm glow of a small table lamp, was a woman. She was standing there, smoking a cigarette, looking out at the rain. Now really picture this scene in your head. Imagine me. I'm a big guy. Now imagine that image soaking wet, shivering violently, wearing nothing but boxer shorts, walking out of the dark woods into your backyard at 2:30 a.m., enraged, swinging a machete around like a madman. We locked eyes for a split second. The porch lights went off instantly. The cigarette vanished. I immediately went into, I'm definitely going to get arrested or shot mode. The adrenaline spiked. I hustled out to the street and ran towards where I hoped my car was. I spent the next hour huddled in a ball in the back seat of my car, heater blasting, just waiting for the flashing blue lights to come up behind me. I was sure the SWAT team was coming. They never did, however. I have no idea what the woman thought when she saw me. A demon? An escaped lunatic? A murderer? It couldn't have been good. I'd almost want to go over there and apologize for scaring the life out of her, but I'm guessing she never, ever wants to see me again. I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, like clockwork, we would get a new crop of interns. Most are fine, just normal kids from high school or college trying to get some work experience. But in 2016, my department received an intern later than usual, right in the middle of the summer. His name was Warner. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well. Although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind. He was friendly, and we had some common interests. He was the only person in the department who was even close to my age. The other interns were all teenagers, and the regular staff averaged around 60 years old, older than my mom. I was psyched to simply have a peer chat with. Occasionally, I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk at his cubicle. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of sharp social awkwardness. I got zero bad vibes from the guy initially. It wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days. He would no-show or arrive late without informing anybody, and generally act unprofessionally. One day, he showed up for work at 3:15 p.m. when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to just go home. His behavior bothered nearly everybody in my office, but I didn't supervise him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. If you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated heavily to the campaign of our big boss. So, he wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of that summer, I put in my notice. I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain. "It sucks you're leaving," he'd say. "We barely had time to become friends." I would always laugh lightly and give a sympathetic yeah. He started to monopolize my time at work more and more, becoming disruptive to the people who sat near me. I found it slightly annoying, but I was mentally checked out. One day, he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus. Occasionally, other coworkers would offer me rides if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me at all. I accepted and walked to his car with him. His car smelled off. It was full of garbage. Fast food wrappers, cups, papers. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat, shoving trash onto the floor, and apologized. We got on our way, but once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said he didn't need to ask that insistently. We stopped at a diner. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation. He was intelligent. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old coworkers. I had a good time. I expressed that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was late. But he kept insisting, so I relented. As I directed him toward my house, he started in again with the whining. Our developing friendship was cut short because "you're moving," he said, gripping the wheel. At this point, I was kind of tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job was a big one for me, and I didn't need the guilt trip. I stopped responding, and his whining faded out. He came up at the turn to get onto my street. When I pointed out, "Turn here," he accelerated. He drove right past it, laughing. I laughed too, in an "oh man, WTF" type of way, thinking he was joking around. But when I began giving instructions about how to turn around, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me. I'm in a man's car. Someone I don't know all that well. Someone who has erratic behavior at work. And now he's kidnapping me, even if mildly. My instinct was not to fight. I felt as if insisting I be let out would escalate the situation. I told him, "Yeah, we could hang out at the park near my house if you want to talk." He seemed to like the idea. We parked and walked over. The pleasant conversation resumed for a bit, but then he dumped his entire life story on me. He talked about his prior arrest for theft, his heroin addiction, his depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was put off. It was too much information. I tried changing the subject by showing him pictures of my dog on my phone. I scrolled one picture too far. The next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely. Way different than the slob I was at work. He grabbed the phone from my hand. "Wow," he whispered. "You are very photogenic." I felt awkward. There was a long silence. Then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we were. How he wished I wasn't moving so we could date. I didn't say anything. He broke the silence. "Sorry I'm saying all this stuff. I'm actually high right now." My blood ran cold. "That's why I know where Riverside is," he continued, mentioning a notoriously bad neighborhood we discussed earlier. "I went there yesterday to buy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense before. Now he was telling me he was currently using. I realized I had been in a car he was operating while under the influence of heroin. I felt very stupid. He immediately started whining again, begging me not to judge him. He kept complimenting me. "You're so understanding. You're so pretty." It was a barrage of weird compliments interspersed with self-hatred. Then he started crying. He made this weird, wheezing sound. his face scrunched up, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he performed this bizarre dry cry, trying to come up with an escape plan. My patience was gone. My anxiety was peaking. I stood up. "The park is close to my house, so I'll walk," I said. Then I remembered I left my bag in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned I forgot my stuff. I joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying instantly. He stood up, ran over to his car to unlock it. I grabbed my stuff out of his back seat. His demeanor changed drastically. He calmly apologized for making things weird. He asked if he could drop me off at home, so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes, but I made him drop me off a block over from my street, so he wouldn't see which house was mine. I could end it there. But what bothered me the most happened later. A week or two after that weird evening, I moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would text me long ramblings. I ignored them. The text stopped. I forgot about him. Fast forward to February. I get a text from a former coworker. "Sorry you had to hear about it this way." Followed by a link to a local news article. "Man dies from wounds in Riverside, stabbing Wednesday." I thought Warner was the victim, but when I read the article, it included his mugshot. He was the attacker. He had murdered somebody. I was shocked, disgusted. Later, I learned that shortly after I left, he was fired for trashing the men's bathroom, smearing soap and destroying fixtures in a rage. He lost his apartment. He ended up homeless in Riverside, squatting in abandoned houses. He stabbed a man to death. I wonder if the man refused to give him something he wanted. I wonder if that's how Warner reacted to a hard no. Hands down the worst in turn I've ever encountered. Okay, let's get into it. For context, I am a petite, soft-spoken woman. At the time, I was 19 and taking summer classes at a community college. One of the classes was public speaking, which met on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 5 p.m. There was this guy. I don't even know his name. He was immediately one of those kids. You know the type. Angry young man, made no effort in school, blasted loud music from his headphones. To get from our classroom on the second floor to the exit, you had to go down a long hallway, down a stairwell to the first floor, through the main lobby, and out the sliding doors. He started waiting for me after class. Every single time, he would follow me all the way down this route to my car. It didn't matter if I pretended to be on my phone. It didn't matter if I had both earbuds in. It didn't matter if I kept my head down and literally power walked away from him. He would match my pace. The whole way, he would talk to me. He asked uncomfortable questions, like asking about each of the different cars I drove to school, my family shared cars. He definitely knew which cars were mine. I tried dropping hints that I had a boyfriend. It didn't deter him. I got a very bad feeling. I finally told the professor. She immediately took it very seriously. She notified campus security and told me to always stay after class so she could walk me to my car. True to form, the guy stopped showing up to class for about 2 weeks. I thought the crisis was averted. Until one day, he showed up again. As soon as I saw him enter the room, my heart dropped into my stomach. During the class, I slipped a trembling note to my professor. He's the kid in the blue shirt. She nodded subtly and told me to hang around after class. I did, and so did the guy. And another female student stayed too. He went up to the professor and started arguing aggressively about why he should pass the class despite never doing the work. The professor asked me and the other girl to wait in the hall. From the hall, we could hear him yelling. It was violent, angry shouting. He eventually stormed out. He saw us in the hallway. He pointed a finger directly at my face and said, "Wait for me. I have no idea who this kid is." I instantly got the heebie-jeebies. I rushed back into the room to tell the professor. The other female student came back 10 minutes later. She told us, "He's just standing in the hall, waiting, staring at the door." The professor called campus security multiple times. No answer. She called the front desk. No answer. We were on our own. We came up with a plan. We would leave the classroom together, pretending to be in a very deep conversation, and walk past him without acknowledging his existence. We walked out. He was leaning against the wall. His eyes bore into us. As we passed him, he peeled himself off the wall and followed us. My professor and I exchanged looks of terror, but we kept our cool act up. We stopped at the main desk in the lobby, pretending to talk to the secretary. The guy passed us, still staring, walking backward to keep eye contact, and finally walked out the sliding doors. We tracked down security ourselves. My professor was furious. After viewing the footage, she contacted the local police. We both had a gut feeling that this kid was dangerous. I had another class from 6 to 8 p.m. Usually, I would go get food during the break. There was no way in hell I was going anywhere. The security officer escorted me to my next class. He asked me to point out my car. When I did, he stopped. "Oh wow," he said. "What?" "He was parked right next to you." The officer told me he had been watching the tapes. The guy had gotten into a car parked directly next to mine, waited in there for a long time, and then eventually left. I knew for a fact I hadn't parked next to anyone when I arrived. The lot was empty. He had parked there specifically to wait for me. When I returned to school 2 days later, I was informed of chilling information. Footage showed him waiting for me in his car on Tuesday, but it also showed him coming back to the parking lot at 8 p.m. when my last class got out. He sat in his car, waiting. I never told him my schedule. I never told him about my night class. He was hunting me. My professor got a lawyer. She was ready to quit if he wasn't banned. The school banned him, but the director of campus security called me later. He downplayed it. He told me the guy just wanted to be my friend, and that me running away probably made him think I was flirting with him. I was excused from physically attending class for the rest of the semester. I still look over my shoulder. I still wonder if he followed me home those nights. I still don't know his name, and I hope I never have to learn it. I have lots of creepy encounters from my travels, but this one stands out. I am Asian, petite, 5 feet 1 inch, and in my 20s. Last year, I went to Egypt with a big tour group of 40 people. For one night, we stayed at this beautiful villa-style hotel on top of the mountains. The layout was unique. A very long pool in the middle surrounded by small, separate villas, each with about 20 rooms. Our group got assigned to the farthest villa from a lobby. It was around 10 p.m. My grandma, who I was sharing the room with, was tired and went to sleep early. I decided to go out for a walk to watch the stars. The desert sky is incredible. I sat on one of the benches by the poolside, enjoying the silence. It was then I noticed one of the hotel staff, a bag porter who had helped with our luggage earlier, approaching me. I thought nothing of it. He came by and made small conversation. I brushed it off as him just being friendly. Then he asked, "Where is your husband?" I laughed it off and lied. "He's back in a room, or maybe at the lobby. He got left behind because of work calls." He nodded, but then said something that gave me the creeps. "My friend is actually looking for a wife from your country." "I'm okay, dude." I tried to end the conversation. He took out his phone and called somebody. He told me to wait. "Wait here. I need you to talk to him." My spidey senses were tingling in overdrive. I had two options: walk back to the villa quickly but risk letting this man know exactly which room I was in with my elderly grandma, or walk towards the well-lighted lobby. I chose the lobby. I stood up and started a power walk. He was still trying to call somebody on his phone and called after me, but I waved goodbye hurriedly. In the lobby, I was relieved to see our tour leader and a few ladies from our group. One of the ladies, B, was browsing inside one of the souvenir shops. I went inside to join her. Inside the shop were B, me, and two salesmen. One was standing near the door, blocking the exit. B asked for my opinion on a painting. The salesman standing in front of us smiled. "These paintings have a different pattern that shows up in glow in the dark. Do you want to see it?" I firmly said, "No, I just wanted to leave." But the salesman said something in Arabic to the other man sitting behind us. The second man stood up. He closed the shop door, and then he hit the light switch. Pitch blackness swallowed the room. I screamed internally. Maybe I'm paranoid, but the idea of being in a pitch-dark room with two strange men in a foreign country is my nightmare. I felt he grabbed my wrist. Her grip was tight, trembling. We were trapped. Suddenly, The door flew open. Light flooded in. It was Bee's aunt. She stood there with our tour guide, looking furious. "What are you doing?" she shouted. She motioned for us to come out quickly. We ran out. The salesman tried to laugh it off, saying they were just showing the art, but the vibe was sinister. We checked our belongings. Everything was there. They weren't trying to rob us. They wanted something else. I shudder to think what would have happened if Bee's aunt hadn't opened that door at that exact second. This happened about a year ago in Arizona. I'm a big guy, ex-football player, late 20s. I don't scare easily. I live in a nice neighborhood. I had roommates, but on this particular Saturday, they were gone. I got home from a business trip around midnight, exhausted. I crashed hard. I'm a heavy sleeper. But around 3 a.m., a sound tore me from sleep. A loud, rhythmic banging. Someone was hammering on my front door. It sounded like they were trying to kick it down. I stumbled out of bed, annoyed, thinking my roommates forgot their keys. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't my roommates. It was a young woman. She looked homeless, wearing a baggy sweatshirt and a beanie in the dead of the Arizona summer heat, 95 degrees Fahrenheit at night. She looked frantic, looking over her shoulder like she was being chased. I was about to open the door to help. Then she stopped looking scared. She started laughing. A low, scary manic laugh. She yelled, "I need to pee. Let me in. Let me in." I stood in silence. Then, she turned and literally hopscotched down my driveway like a child, disappearing into the dark. 30 minutes later, the knock happens again. Furious, I ran to the door. I looked through the peephole. It was a guy this time. Scrawny, same baggy clothes. Behind him, I could see the woman jumping up and down, laughing silently. "Yo, dude," the guy yelled at the wood of the door. "My girl has to pee. Let us in." I backed away. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a chef's knife, and retreated to my bedroom closet. I figured if they broke in, I'd ambush them. 2 hours passed. Silence. I dozed off in the closet, knife in hand. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from my bedroom window. My room is on the ground floor, facing the backyard pool. I crept to the blinds. I peeked out. The woman was there. Her face was pressed against the glass, peering into the darkness of my room. She was tapping gently, and behind her, in my pool, was the guy. He was butt naked, doing cannonballs into the water silently. I lost it. "Hey, get out of my pool," I yelled through the glass. The woman's eyes snapped to mine. We were inches apart, separated only by the window pane. She smiled, a wide, unnatural grin, and she started laughing again. I called the cops instantly. By the time they arrived, the couple was gone, vanished over the fence. The next day, neighborhood watch flyers went up. Over the past 3 nights, 6 homes have been broken into, and 4 family dogs have been brutally tortured and killed in those homes. The hair on my neck stood up. I installed an alarm system and bought a gun. That woman's face still haunts my dreams. A few years ago, my brother-in-law asked me to manage an apartment complex he bought in Leesburg, Florida. It's a weird town, part retirement community, part biker haven. I moved into a 1-bedroom unit to be the on-site manager. There was a tenant named Andy. Andy was enormous. I'm 6 feet 4 inches, 250 pounds. Andy was at least 6 feet 6 inches and 400 pounds. He walked with a cane, had greasy black hair in a ponytail, and lived on disability. He was quiet. He paid his rent on time. His apartment was surprisingly neat whenever I had to enter for maintenance. Things were fine for a year. Then came November. It was midnight, raining hard. My doorbell rang. It was Joseph, an elderly tenant. He looked terrified. "Sam, something isn't right with Andy." I followed him to Andy's door. I heard crashing sounds inside. Yelling. Andy was fighting with someone. It sounded violent. I knocked loudly. The noise stopped. Andy opened the door. He looked deranged. His shirt was covered in grease stains. He smelled like terrible body odor. Behind him, the apartment, usually clean, was a disaster zone. Furniture overturned, trash everywhere. I asked if he was okay. He snarled at me that he was fine and slammed the door. December rolled around. No rent check from Andy. That was unlike him. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again a day later. I heard low moaning. I used my master key. The smell hit me like a physical wall. It smelled of rot, feces, vomit, and sickness. The walls were smeared with brown filth. I called out his name. I found him in the back bedroom. He was naked, lying on a pile of dirty clothes. He was covered in his own waste. But the worst part, he was covered in bites. Human bite marks all over his arms and legs. They were infected, oozing pus. He was bleeding from his rectum. He had inserted something foreign. His internal organs had ruptured. Later, in the hospital, we learned the truth. There was no one else in the apartment that night in November. He was fighting with himself. The bites? He had bitten himself. He had cannibalized his own flesh in a psychotic break. I had to clean the apartment. In a shoebox in his closet, I found his collection. Cutouts for magazines, old family photos, and photos he had secretly taken of the other residents, including me, through our windows. Every single photo had the eyes burnt out with cigarettes, and on some, the mouths were sewn shut with thread. I realized then that the monster wasn't just in his head. It had been watching us all year.